How's it going, my dudes? This video's brought to you by Squarespace today.
Ever since Star Trek the original series debuted in 1966, the writers for the franchise have introduced hundreds of aliens. Aliens such as the Klingons, Romulans, and Ferengi have become recurring characters in the assorted Star Trek spin-offs. Others have appeared only once as a way for the writers to explore themes presented in that episode. Aliens such as the Voth from Star Trek Voyager were so compelling in their single outings that they demand their own multi-episode storylines to further explore their cultures. Aliens such as the Founders from Star Trek Deep Space Nine have had compelling story arcs that ended in ways that had interesting future implications. And since the creation of their streaming service, Paramount have given us plenty more Star Trek spin-offs, and they show little sign of stopping anytime soon. Any new series that comes along, of course, introduces new aliens. However, they'll also have the opportunity to revisit past species. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for TrekCulture, and these are 10 Star Trek aliens who should make a comeback. Number 10. Iotians. The highly imitative Iotians were introduced in the original series episode A Piece of the Action. When the Enterprise crew encountered them, they discovered that the Iotians had shaped their culture around Prohibition-era gangsters after studying a history book left behind by a previous Starship crew. The Iotian city visited by the Enterprise crew resembled Chicago or New York from the 1920s or early 1930s. The people wore suits, hats, and dresses right out of a gangster movie, and they peppered their speech with early 20th century American slang. When the episode ended, McCoy was worried that he had lost his communicator on the Iotian planet. A future installment of Star Trek could explore the implications of McCoy's error. If a future crew found the Iotians living as faux Starfleet officers, would the Federation attempt to correct the damage? Or would they simply walk away while putting up a warning buoy to prevent future Starfleet vessels from approaching the planet? And what of the Iotians themselves? If they believed they were part of the Federation, would they make contact and demand to know why the Federation had forgotten them? Maybe they'd even consider the real Starfleet as imitators and declare war against them. The possibilities are endless. Number 9. The Antikins and Sele. The dog-like Antikins and the snake-like but still humanoid Sele were introduced in the Next Generation episode Lonely Among Us. Delegates from both species were being transported by the Enterprise D to the neutral planet Parliament to resolve their long-standing conflict before both races joined the Federation. The conflict between the Sele involved the carnivorous Antikins viewing the Sele as a source of food and eating them alive, and the Sele retaliating. I mean, who wouldn't retaliate? However, their conflict was barely even a subplot. The focus of the episode was a non-corporeal alien who attempted to take over the ship by transferring its consciousness from one crew member to another. A future Star Trek series or even an episode of Lower Decks could explore the conflict between the Antikins and Sele in greater detail. It could show the audience how the conflict was resolved and how joining the Federation went for both species. For instance, how did the Federation convince the Antikins to stop eating the Sele? Did they do it willingly, or was it like trying to convince me to eat fish? Not gonna happen. It's disgusting. Did the Antikins ever get over their disgust at eating replicated meat? Did the Antikins and Sele get along well enough to serve together, or does Starfleet carefully avoid assigning members of the two species to the same ship? So many unanswered questions. Number 8. The Binar. The Binar were introduced in the Next Generation episode 11001001 as glorified IT guys who secretly use the Enterprise D's computer as backup storage for their planet's endangered central computer. They informed the crew that they didn't ask for help because their binary thinking could only allow for 2 possible answers, yes or no. Their situation was so dire, damage to their central computer was catastrophic to their society, that they couldn't risk a no. As shown in the episode, the Binars were cybernetically enhanced humanoids who interacted with their planet's central computer through a synaptic processor implanted in their heads shortly after birth. They controlled the rate of information they received from the computer through a buffer worn on the waist. They always lived and worked in pairs and spoke a high-frequency language that resembled binary code and was unintelligible to humans. When they did use English, they finished each other's sentences. This level of technological and social integration essentially made the Binars a benign version of the Borg. A future appearance by the Binars could explore themes of this episode in greater detail. For example, the question arises, could their binary thinking lead to a war with the Federation? If the question they faced were, does the Federation pose a threat, would they wage war because they couldn't risk a yes answer? Yes, we saw the Binar working with that pesky Nick Lucano in Lower Decks Season 4, but we want them to have their own story. Give them a full plot line. We want to explore them in greater detail. Number 7. The Tusk and the Hunters. In the Deep Space Nine episode Captive Pursuit, the Tusk were reptilian humanoids bred as sentient prey for a humanoid species referred to simply as the Hunters. In the episode, O'Brien developed a friendship with a member of the Tusk species, also called Tusk, and risked his life and career to help him escape the Hunters. Both the Hunters and Tusk saw the hunt as the natural order of things and didn't understand the moral objections to it. Although Tusk had been engineered to believe this and has known no other way of existing. A future appearance of these species could explore how this arrangement came about and whether or not the founders were involved. The Tusk, like the Gem Hadar, were created for a singular purpose and had traits in common with the Dominion soldiers, including the ability to cloak themselves. If the founders created the Tusk, what did they create them for? Did they give them to the Hunters as a gift for their loyalty to the Dominion? Or were the Tusk created as prototypes for the Gem Hadar that founders used to test out ideas for their soldiers? New technologies do go through a period of testing before they go into mass production, after all. Number 6. The Remans. The Remans were introduced in the movie Star Trek Nemesis as the slave caste of the Romulan Empire. The Remans were considered fierce warriors, and during the Dominion War, the Romulans used them as cannon fodder. During the course of the movie, the Remans got their revenge when they deposed the Romulan Senate and made Captain Jean-Luc Picard's clone Shinzon the praetor of the Romulan Empire. Shinzon's rule was short-lived, as his nefarious plans were eventually stopped by Picard and the crew of the Enterprise E. The first season of Star Trek Picard depicted the Romulans in the aftermath of the supernova that destroyed their homeworld. Star Trek Discovery has shown that by the 32nd century, the Romulans had migrated back to Vulcan, since renamed Ni'Var, and reunified with their Vulcan cousins, finally fulfilling Spock's long-held dream. Any discussion of the Remans on these two shows was conspicuously absent. Some of the questions that a future appearance of the Remans could explore would be what were the repercussions of Shinzon's coup, whether their home planet survived the supernova, whether they were still part of Romulan society, and if they were, whether they were still slaves or were they now treated as equals who were also now living on Ni'Var. Number 5. The Breen. First mentioned in The Next Generation as a kind of running joke, the Breen were first depicted on Deep Space Nine as a secretive, reclusive, and warlike race who eventually became allies to the Dominion. The mysterious beings were never seen without their wolf-like helmets and refrigeration suits. However, during the Dominion War, Weyoun remarked to Damar that the Breen home planet was actually quite temperate, adding further mystery to their use of environmental suits. Even their electronic-sounding language was unintelligible without special adjustments to the Universal Translator. Although the other inhabitants of the Alpha Quadrant knew few details about the Breen, by the time the Dominion War began, they had a reputation for treacherous behavior as exemplified by the Romulans saying, "Never turn your back on a Breen." A future Star Trek spin-off that used the Breen as antagonists could explore such questions as what happened after the Dominion War, what their culture was really like, and what did they really look like under those damn helmets and the refrigeration suits. Was the Breen homeworld truly temperate as Weyoun insisted, or did they use them to seem even more mysterious? After all, there is a long history of warriors such as samurai using armor for psychological effect just as much as for protection. Number 4. The Gem Hadar. As shown in the Dominion War storyline in Deep Space Nine, the Gem Hadar were the genetically engineered super soldiers of the Dominion leaders, the Founders. Like the Stormtroopers in Star Wars, they used their military might to crush opposition to the Founders' rule and impose the Founders' will on the Dominion subjects. The Founders engineered the Gem Hadar to be stronger and tougher than any other species they might encounter, to worship the Founders like gods, and to be dependent on Ketracel White, a chemical compound containing a missing enzyme that Gem Hadar needed to survive. But what would happen to such soldiers after the Dominion War? Would they still worship the Founders like gods even though they lost the war? Or would they rebel against false gods like the Jafar from the Stargate franchise? If they did remain in the Dominion, would the Founders re-engineer them so they were no longer addicted to Ketracel White? Or would the Gem Hadar rather die out than remain slaves? If they show up in future Star Trek, will they be friend or will they be foe? Number 3. The Verter. On Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the Verter were genetically engineered humanoids who served the Founders as bureaucrats, diplomats, scientists, doctors, military commanders, and fawning sycophants who worship the shape-shifting authoritarians as gods. Unlike the Gem Hadar, both male and female Verter served the Dominion. However, no evidence of the Verter reproducing sexually was ever depicted on the series. Instead, they were cloned, and when an individual Verter died, they were immediately replaced by a new clone with the same memories and basic personalities as their predecessors. However, individual clones would develop their own personality quirks, and defective clones would develop personalities completely different from the rest of their predecessors. So pretend for a moment that you're one of these genetically engineered cloned space bureaucrats. How would you have reacted to the Dominion's defeat? How did Odo's influence over the Founders change their relationship with the Verter? Did the Verter still view them as gods? Were they still even part of the Dominion? As shown in Star Trek Discovery, the Founders still existed on a planet featured on a 32nd century star chart. If that detail was teasing an encounter between the Discovery and a future incarnation of the Dominion, perhaps we'll get answers to these questions in the near future. Number 2. The Founders. Introduced in Deep Space Nine, the Founders, also called Changelings, were the shape-shifting authoritarian rulers of the Dominion, a funhouse mirror image of the Federation that imposed the Founders' imposed idea of perfect order over the Gamma Quadrant. Soon after encountering the Federation, the Founders thought it would be a good idea to impose their perfect order on the Alpha and Beta Quadrants as well. That went about as well as would be expected, and the Founders soon found themselves embroiled in a drawn-out war that pitted them and their allies, the Cardassians and the Breen, against the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans. The end of the Dominion War had far-reaching consequences for their species. They hadn't considered the effect of living in the Alpha Quadrant on Odo, a long-lost member of their race. By the time the war started, Odo had spent his life working with, befriending, and even loving solids. When he returned to the Gamma Quadrant and joined the Changeling Collective, the Great Link, his knowledge and experience was added to their collective consciousness. As shown in Star Trek Discovery, a 32nd century star chart featured a Founder homeworld. Were these 32nd century Founders still antagonistic towards solids like their 24th century counterparts, or had Odo's merger with the Great Link made them more trusting and accepting of solid species? These would be excellent themes for a future season of Discovery or another series set in the 32nd century. And before you start, I can hear you shouting at me through the screen already. I know the Changelings were in Picard Season 3, but these were separate from the Great Link. They were acting on their own accord, they formed an alliance with the Borg, they were tortured and captured by the Federation. These were not part of the Founders, and they are who we want to see return. Number 1. The Voth. The Voth were introduced in the Voyager episode Distant Origin. They were saurian humanoids that evolved on Earth in the Cretaceous period from a common ancestor with hadrosaurs. However, their religious beliefs, referred to as the Doctrine, taught that they originated in the Delta Quadrant, the earliest sentient species to develop there. In the episode, a Voth scientist, Gagan, discovered evidence proving their origin on Earth, and much like Galileo, was put on trial for his troubles. Although defended by Voyager's commander Chakotay, Gagan lost the trial, and at the end of the episode, the Doctrine was still deemed the true Voth origin. However, the ever-optimistic Gagan believed his people would someday accept Earth as their true origin. So what would happen when they do? As depicted in Distant Origin, Voth leaders viewed mammalian species such as humans as inferior life forms. Would they invade the Federation and lay claim to Earth as the original owners? Starfleet would have something to say about that, and a war would likely follow. But as shown in the episode, the Voth had a 65 million year advantage over humans. They lived in a gargantuan city ship that made Voyager look like a flea. Would the Voth's technological superiority give them an edge in a war? A story arc or even a full season or 2 of a Star Trek series could explore these questions.
Hi, I'm Duncan Relic, no relation, and I'm GTN's new progenitor expert. And I collect relics from before the burn. And I'm here to tell you about Squarespace. Using their next generation fluid engine, I created a website that isn't crud. They even have templates, and using them is as smooth as a progenitor's head. Creating an online store was a doddle. You can even create your own merch with Squarespace. They'll handle production, inventory, and super fast pathway shipping. So here's your red directive. Go to https://www.squarespace.com/TrekCulture for a free trial and 10% off your first website or domain purchase. I've been Duncan Relic, no relation.
And that concludes our list. If you can think of others, then do let us know in the comments down below. We are so close to 300,000 subscribers, so if you haven't hit that subscribe button, please go do it now. Also, follow us on the various social medias and hit the like button too if you're feeling generous. I've been Ellie for TrekCulture. I hope you have a wonderful day, and remember to boldly go where no one has gone before.